Welcome to a review of Chapter 6, Procedures and Tools for Gathering Data. We have previously discussed about different types of research, and each of these types of research tend to have a specific focus. In addition to that, they have a number of commonalities that we will discuss in this chapter. But let's just quickly review types of different research. Ethnographic studies fall into the category of qualitative study. It examines social behaviors, perceptions, and meanings of participants. Historical studies examines past events. One could imagine a historical study investigating the integration of public schools in Henrico County following integration in the early 1960s. Survey research are often used to describe characteristics of the participants who participate in the study. Just think about that almost every time if you have visited a hotel or if you have done something, you go to Best Buy, you go to Target, wherever you go, on the cash receipt that you get from the cash register, there is typically a little survey where they want to learn about the experiences that you had during this particular shopping spree. Correlational research examines relationships, and in order to make predictive interpretations about how these relationships interact with one another. Causal comparative studies look at cause and effect. I would say that these tend to be fairly limited in the field of education because many times the conditions for causal comparative studies cannot be achieved in educational research. It would, for instance, be unethical to say that we want to examine the benefits of education, so some students would get education and other students would not. So, as I said, causal comparative studies are often rare in educational research. Experimental, quasi-experimental research looks for causation or possible causation. Mixed methods research looks at or involves both quantitative and qualitative research. They are becoming more and more common in the field of educational research, where we are realizing that we are working with human beings, and therefore research has to take into consideration the individualized developmental levels of participants in the studies. We cannot automatically reduce children into averages and numbers. Action research is focuses on innovation at the local school level, which is the type of research that you all will be conducting next semester. Hopefully, most of you will be in your classrooms so that you can conduct action research. And evaluation research is a way to evaluate a certain procedure, a new set of textbooks, and new strategies for leaderships that have been implemented into a school setting. So when we look at what types of data are needed, there are a variety of different types of data that we need in order to answer our research problem. For instance, descriptions are verbal representations of participants, etc., etc. For instance, the video I produced last week about the collaboration that is needed in week 2 of this class in order to come up with consensus about the research problem and the research questions following the movie that you watched. Scores are numerical values assigned to test performances. For instance, the scores that Devon achieved on my social studies test related to the US Constitution. Measurements are numerical values that are the result that they come from other instruments than tests. So, for instance, if we are interested in students' weights, it could be Sharon's weight of 135 pounds. That would be a measurement. Opinions come from participants and informants. We could, for instance, imagine that if we reference back the study that I previously proposed, the experiences of GLBTQ middle school students, what they say about their daily academic and social experiences would be opinions or perceptions. Statements are typically made by more authoritative people. It could be, for instance, the statements that were made after the tragedy at Sandy Hook in December, a little over a year ago. And last but not least, sometimes we conduct analysis of information that is available to us in order to arrive at clarification. So, for instance, we could imagine that a group of teachers with neuroscientists review brain scans of children who have experienced adverse childhood experiences, and through that find out that essential organs in the brain are smaller than those children who have not experienced adverse childhood experiences, and as a result of that, self-regulation tends to be less developed in kids who have experienced adverse childhood experiences. We obtain data from a variety of sources. We used to use the term, typically in quantitative research, we used to talk about subjects, but the field is more and more moving into the direction of talking about participants, who are people who were selected to participate in the research problem. Procedures are formalized way of operating in educational settings. It could be lessons plans, it could be blueprints that have been developed to align SOLs, etc., etc. Settings are the specific environment. It could be classrooms, it could be schools, it could be the library, it could be the athletic fields. Sometimes we gather data from inanimate objects. We might be analyzing students' artwork. We might be analyzing other artifacts that are in the school. You come into a school and you see a display case of sports trophies, and you might then analyze those and begin to realize that in this school, sports participation is highly valued. Records is another way that we can collect data. It could be student records, the primary student file, where we would find essential information related to attendance, birth date, family members, eligibility for reduced or free lunches, etc., etc. Another source of data are documents. They are written papers or reports, could be produced either by the school system, by a national organization, or by consultants who have been hired to come in and look at a particular issue in a school. And informants are other people than participants in a study. So they could be experts that are being consulted in order to garner additional information about the topic under study. Now, how do we collect the samples for our studies, or do we collect samples? Whenever we are talking about samples, it is a specific research-related name. Vocabulary? Yeah, I guess that's it. So whenever we are talking about a sample, we are talking about a sample, a smaller group of people, that if in some way we could select some of these people, and that the findings from this smaller sample would reflect the findings of the larger population, then it would be easier and more manageable for us to conduct the study. So two broad categories that we talk about are what we call probability sampling and non-probability sampling. In probability sampling, the most common form that we would like to use, and the simplest and the best form is random sampling. It simply means that each participant has equal chance or equal probability of being selected. We used to handpick people for random sampling. Today, computer programs are oftentimes used for random sampling. For instance, I use Blackboard's random sampling procedure to assign you to the professional learning communities. So I did not handpick you in any way. I simply asked Blackboard to randomly assign the number of students to the 4 PLCs that I had established. Stratified random sampling is used to assure that subgroups are proportionally represented. For instance, imagine that you are in a school with many different ethnic groups, and in certain ethnic groups, we want to make, not in certain ethnic groups, we want to make sure that every ethnic group in our study is adequately and has the same proportional participation in the study, so that we are trying to weigh the information that we get based on the actual composition of the population. Cluster sampling is used when there's already some kind of selection that has already happened. Let's say that we want to assess the use of iPads in PE classes, and that we want 50 participants in the study. If we now go into a large high school where PE classes are already established, if we selected 50 participants, we might not necessarily get the right representation. We might get 50 students who were scheduled to work at different times or be in PE at different times, and therefore it did not work. So rather than doing totally random sampling, we use cluster sampling, where we then randomly select the participants from the clusters that they are already organized into the PE class in which they participate. At times we use systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is used when, for instance, people are named on a master list, and then we decide to select every 13th participant, or every 17th, or every 26th participant for sampling in our sample, that then will reflect hopefully our total population. About the topic under investigation. Let's return to the study of the experiences of middle school students who are most used forms of sampling in educational research, where we use existing classrooms of students in order to investigate the impact of a new instructional strategy or of a new behavior support and management system. Another form of non-probability sampling is known as judgment or purposive sampling, which is used in qualitative research. In this type of research, the researcher selects purposefully the participants that she wants to participate in the study. She selects the participants because they are information rich and because they are willing to explore and talk about our research problem. If we imagine that we were to conduct a study of the experiences of DLBTQ middle school students as it relates to their social and academic experiences, we would very likely use purposive samplings. We would begin to talk to some of the students who are most articulate and who are willing to talk about the experiences that they have in middle school. After we have talked to these first students, and we would want to expand the size of our sample, we might ask them who of their friends that they believe we could also talk to, which leads to the next sampling strategy that is called snowball sampling, or also is known as network or chain sampling. When we have interviewed these students, we might ask them to identify other students with whom we can speak. Quota sampling is used whenever we want to conduct research about a particular group in a educational setting. Let's say that we want to conduct a study about the educational background of different ethnic groups of parents who are at a school. We want to make sure that we get sufficient participation of each ethnic group. So we might divide them into quotas so that we decide that the parents with a background from Asia will get this kind of representation, Native Americans will get this kind of quota, etc., so that we get a balance in our sample that represents the total population within the school. And finally, but not least, systematic sampling is used when, for instance, we have a master list with all the names of the participants or of the population who could participate in a particular study. We might then select every 22nd name on the list to be enrolled in the study. There's also often a question about what is the size of a sample that is needed for us in order to conduct a quantitative research, study. So whenever we are talking about descriptive research, we should probably have 10% to 20% of the population who are involved in the study. In correlational research, the rule of thumb is a minimum of 30 participants, and in causal comparative and experimental research, the minimum is 15 per group. Remember here that this is because we are using more rigid or stringent sampling strategies. So the more we can get close to random sampling, the smaller our groups are. When we conduct qualitative research, there is not a set number of participants that are specified. Qualitative researchers talk about that they have the right number of participants in a study when they reach saturation of information. For instance, I have conducted 2 qualitative ethnographic studies, and in each of those, the number of participants were about 25. Data analysis is ongoing in qualitative research, so you know that you're beginning to reach this level of saturation when no new information shows up in your data analysis process. Let's talk a little bit about validity and reliability in data collection. Validity of data, whether or not the data measure and what they purport to measure. There are different sources of validity that we can collect. There is evidence based on the test consent. Is the test actually testing what it set out to do? There's evidence based on response processes. Do people respond consistently to the types of questions that we are asking? There is evidence based on the internal structure. Do we get the same kinds of answers in different segments of the data that we are collecting? There's evidence based on relations to other variables, and basically there is evidence based on consequences of testing. For non-test data, we are often talking about what is called external criticism, or also known as authenticity. Reliability of data is whether or not the data are being measured consistently. So there are different types. There is what we call retest reliability. It's basically, I administer this test today, I get this score of 67, I test again, and I do not get a score the next go around on 96 or something like that. So I get about the same results every time that I'm administering the test. You also are very familiar with equivalent form. There's a form A and a form B. And for a form or for a test to be good, we should get the same results or close to the same results on the same tests that we use. Split half method is basically that you take a survey or an assessment or a test or whatever it is, where you look at how the answers are in the first half of the test, and then you look at how they are in the second half of the test, and the answers in that way should be consistent also. We also looking at reliability as it relates to internal consistency, which means that do people answer questions consistently the same way throughout the assessment. One of the very common way of collecting data is through what we call notations. They are often written, very brief types of notes. It could be a little hash mark that indicates our observation of untasked behavior in the classroom. It could be a notation about this part of the class, this part of the instruction that worked well, another part where you might say to yourselves, this transition here will have to be improved. It could be if you are using a PowerPoint presentations, something like that, where you discover that there's a shorter way or a more concrete way that you can describe what is going on in that situation. So therefore, notations could also be short verbal notations that you might be very, very familiar with them. You go to Target, you go to Best Buy, you go some other place, and you know that at the bottom of the receipt that you get, there is, please take a survey and let us know about how we did today. And many, many times there is a Likert type of scale, that is a graduation, 5 different answers from not at all to very much or something like that. There are also different surveys that we do more cross-sectional over a short period of time, and then we do longitudinal surveys where we follow groups of people for long, long periods of time. We all know about testing. Education has become increasingly about testing, where we use standardized assessment as a way to assess student learning. There are also measurements that we talked about before, and there can be a variety of scales that we use in measurements such as interval, ordinal, and nominal scales that all will help us collect data. So table 6.1 in your book is a very, very good table that kind of demonstrates a composite of data collection procedures. So it is important for you maybe to consult that as you and your group are beginning to determine which type of data collection procedures best suit the research questions that you have articulated. Here are a number of websites that you can use and access to learn more about a discussion of sampling terminology and strategies. Thank you.